The mistress handed the virgin slave to monsters. Hours later, she held a burning iron. Celia did not remember dropping to her knees. One moment, she was being dragged across the kitchen floor, lungs burning, shoulders screaming where the rope bit into her wrists. The next, she was on the cold bricks, one hand clamped around the wrist of her mistress, the other wrapped around the handle of a branding iron that glowed the color of the sun. The iron had been resting in the coals, heating for the cattle. Now it was inches from Adelaide Whitmore's pale face. The mistress of Whitmore Plantation, the woman who owned the land and the people and the air they breathed, no longer looked like a queen of Georgia society. Her carefully arranged hair had fallen loose. Her silk gown was smeared with ash. Her eyes, usually icy and amused, were wide and wet with an animal kind of terror. "Don't move," Celia said. Her voice surprised her. It was lower than she remembered, rough from screaming, yet steady in a way her trembling body was not. Heat from the iron pulsed into her arm, searing through the thin fabric of her sleeve. She could smell scorched wood, hot metal, and beneath it all, the sharp human scent of fear. Two overseers stood frozen in the doorway. Dawson, broad and red-faced, with his whip still in his hand. Pike, lean and gray-eyed, his fingers hovering near the pistol at his belt. Behind them, in the dim hallway beyond the kitchen, other household servants pressed their backs to the wall, trying to be invisible. No one made a sound. "If either of you takes another step," Celia said, "I'll put this iron on her face, and every person in this county will see what you let happen." Dawson shifted his weight, rage twisting his features, but the way Adelaide whimpered when the iron dipped closer stopped him cold. He was a cruel man, but he knew the worth of the white woman he served. Whitmore Plantation was Thomas Whitmore's, yes, but Adelaide was its spine. Celia tightened her grip on Adelaide's wrist. The mistress tried to pull away, but the girl held her firmly against the rough edge of the table. The wood dug into Celia's knees, but she didn't care. Her whole world had narrowed to the glowing iron, the pale throat in front of her, and the dull roar of blood in her ears. Adelaide's lips trembled. You don't know what you're doing," she whispered. Celia leaned in until she could see her own reflection in the mistress's pupils. Sweat, tears, a split lip, a face that had forgotten how to be a child's. 17 years old, and tonight she felt carved from something older than the red clay outside. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," Celia said softly. "You handed me to those men like I was scrap. A test, a lesson, a game. Now I'm giving you a lesson too." Images crashed over her. The sunlight on the porch when they first pulled her from the wagon, the lazy fan in Adelaide's hand, the bored curl of the mistress's lip as she said, "Teach her how we welcome folks at Whitmore." The grip of Dawson's fingers digging into her arm, the sound of boots behind her, the laughter from the other cabins dying into silence. She pushed the memories down, forcing herself back into this kitchen, into this moment. "You think I won't do it?" Celia said. "You think because I'm the one in chains that I still fear what you can take from me." Her fingers tightened on the iron until her knuckles ached. "Look at me, Mrs. Whitmore." Adelaide tried to look away. "Look at me," Celia repeated. Slowly, Adelaide obeyed. For the first time since Celia had arrived in Georgia, their eyes met without the buffer of distance, without the shield of servants and steps and social rules between them. Celia saw the truth then. Beneath the powder and pearls, beneath the silk and the silver, there was nothing magical about this woman. Adelaide Whitmore was not a goddess, not a force of nature. She was flesh and bone, thin skin over fragile veins, one heartbeat away from screaming like anyone else. For the first time, Celia saw fear in her mistress's face that matched the fear that had lived in hers for as long as she could remember. Behind them, someone whispered a prayer. Outside, the afternoon heat lay heavy over the fields. Cicadas shrilled in the distance. Indifferent. Somewhere, horses stamped nervously in their stalls, sensing the way the air had changed. Celia's arms shook. The iron hummed in her hand, a red promise. This was madness. This was suicide. This was the kind of act that ended with a noose or a bullet or worse. But as she knelt on that hard kitchen floor with the branding iron in her hand, and the most powerful white woman in 3 counties pinned beneath her grip, Celia felt something she had not felt since the day they tore her from her mother's arms. She felt free. She drew in a ragged breath. Whatever happens after this, she thought, they will never again believe we are too frightened to touch them. The iron hissed as a spark leapt from the fire. Adelaide flinched. Dawson swore under his breath. Pike's fingers twitched. Celia felt the world tip on its axis. But to understand how a girl who arrived in Georgia with bruised wrists and lowered eyes came to hold a burning iron over her mistress's skin, we have to go back to the day she first set foot on Whitmore Plantation, and the moment she realized this place was built to break more than just bodies. 3 weeks earlier, when the wagon first rolled into Whitmore Plantation, Celia had no fire in her hands, no iron, no rage sharp enough to slice through fear. She had only the clothes on her back, the ache of being torn from her mother, and a quiet determination not to fall apart in front of strangers. Whitmore Plantation stretched across nearly 800 acres of Georgia clay. The land was beautiful in the way a storm can be beautiful. Vast, overwhelming, capable of swallowing anything unprepared for it. Cotton fields rippled under the June sun, the white bolls glowing like frost against the rust-colored soil. The air was thick with humidity, and the faint, sour scent of sweat soaked into wood, soil, and history. The main house dominated everything. Painted a blinding white, towering with 4 great columns, it looked less like a home and more like a courthouse waiting to pass judgment. Slave quarters dotted the landscape behind it, small clapboard shacks standing in rigid rows, roofs warped from heat, chimneys tilting like tired old men. To the east rose the barns and carriage sheds. To the west sprawled the fields where dozens of men, women, and even children bent beneath the weight of endless labor. Life here followed a rhythm that had little to do with the seasons and everything to do with control. At sunrise, the overseer's whistles pierced the morning haze. Chains rattled, doors creaked, and bodies filed out for work. The crack of Dawson's whip echoed long before breakfast. Pike's calm, measuring steps haunted every path. Conversations died as soon as either of them appeared. This was the world Celia had been dragged into. On her first night, she sat on a narrow cot in a cramped cabin shared with 3 older women. Ruth, the eldest, had a voice soft as cottonseed and hands roughened by kitchen work. Miriam, tall and stern, rarely spoke at all. Lena, the youngest among them, kept her eyes lowered, lips pressed tightly as if holding back words that could get someone killed. Ruth offered Celia a cup of water. "Drink, child. Tomorrow will be harder." Celia drank, throat burning from dust and thirst. "What is this place?" she whispered. Miriam answered in a voice flat as stone. "A place where people disappear." Lena added quietly, "A place where hope goes to die if you aren't careful." Celia stared at the wooden floor. Outside, the fields lay silent under the moon, but the silence felt unnatural, like something was holding its breath. The women didn't ask about her past, not directly. They didn't need to. Celia's fresh bruises, her trembling hands. The hollow look in her eyes spoke loudly enough. Yet Ruth asked one question while checking the bandage around Celia's wrist. "You got family still living?" Celia swallowed hard. "My mother, if she's still alive." Lena turned away, unable to meet her gaze. Celia didn't ask the question that haunted her. Why did people whisper that Whitmore broke souls? She sensed she would learn soon enough. The next morning, she was taken to the fields. Pike walked beside her, silent but watchful. The sky was already pale with heat, though the sun had barely risen. Workers bent over cotton rows, fingers moving quickly, rhythmically, despite the rawness of their hands. Children ran water jugs back and forth. A woman sang softly, a melody so old it felt like it had been born in the soil. Pike stopped in front of a row. "You work here today. Keep your head down. Don't slow the others." Celia nodded, but as she reached for the cotton bolls, the sharp prickle of the dried husk cut her fingers. She jerked back instinctively. Pike's eyes narrowed. "Learn fast," he said. "Mistakes are expensive around here." By noon, Celia's arms trembled from exhaustion. Sweat stung her eyes. The sun pressed down like hot iron. Someone handed her a ladle of water, Lena working nearby. "Don't let them see you cry," Lena whispered. "They enjoy it." Celia blinked rapidly to clear her vision. "Is it always like this?" "No," Lena said. "Sometimes it's worse." Later that week, Celia was moved to the house. She didn't understand whether it was luck or punishment. Ruth warned her that working under Adelaide Whitmore meant constant scrutiny. "Mind your tone," Ruth said. "Mind your eyes. She hates when people look her straight on." "What happens if I make a mistake?" Ruth took a long breath. "Pray you don't." Celia learned that Adelaide ran the house like a general commanding troops. The woman's beauty was as sharp as her cruelty. Faultless hair, immaculate gowns, a voice that never rose but could cut like a knife. When she walked into a room, conversation stopped. Servants retreated into corners. Even her husband, Thomas Whitmore, carried himself differently around her. Celia's duties were simple but exhausting. Polishing silver, scrubbing floors, carrying water, mending sheets. Adelaide inspected every task personally. A smudge on a window meant kneeling for an hour. A wrinkle in a tablecloth meant a slap sharp enough to leave the air ringing. But it was never the strikes that frightened Celia most. It was the look in Adelaide's eyes. A cold, wintry gaze that told Celia she was less than a person, not worth the thought it took to harm her. Yet beneath all this, beneath the scorching heat, the bruises, the oppressive silence, Celia felt something growing inside her. It wasn't courage. Not yet. It wasn't anger either. It was something quieter but far more dangerous. It was awareness. Awareness of how the overseers flinched when Thomas was in a bad mood. Awareness of how Adelaide's voice sharpened when she received letters from her family. Awareness of how Pike paused sometimes when he looked at the youngest slaves, as if troubled by something he would never admit aloud. Awareness that everyone on Whitmore Plantation lived by rules written in blood, rules that depended on fear like crops depended on rain. And Celia knew fear better than most. But she also knew this. Fear was not immutable. It could bend, it could shift, it could burn. And for the first time, as she scrubbed the floors of the house in the late evening heat, listening to Adelaide's footsteps pass overhead, she felt a chill crawl over her skin, a whisper of dread so faint and yet so certain that she paused mid-scrub. Something was coming, something she could not yet name, and it would change everything. The moment that marked the true beginning of Celia's descent came on her 9th morning at Whitmore Plantation. The sun had barely cleared the treetops, yet the air already hung thick with heat, heavy enough to choke on. Celia was polishing the hallway banister outside the dining room, her rag moving in small, tired circles, when she heard Adelaide's voice drifting from inside, light, amused, and sharp. "She's barely more than skin and bones," the mistress said. But Patterson swore she was untouched, a rarity these days. Celia froze. Thomas Whitmore grunted in reply. "You want her in the house or the cabins?" "The house," Adelaide said. "Pretty faces belong where guests can admire them." Celia felt her breath catch. She kept her head bowed, hoping her trembling wouldn't show. Then Thomas added, "If she doesn't behave, Dawson knows how to correct her." Celia tightened her grip on the cloth. Her heartbeat thrummed painfully in her ears. She could almost feel Dawson's hand closing around her wrist again, squeezing until her bones ached. She forced her breath slow. She forced her hands to move. And she forced herself not to think about what untouched meant to people like the Whitmores. Minutes later, Adelaide stepped into the hallway. "You there?" she said. Celia straightened instinctively. Adelaide lifted a finger, motioning for her to follow. "You're coming with me. There's something I need you to prepare." Ruth's warning from her first night echoed inside her head. "Pray you don't make a mistake." Celia swallowed hard and followed the mistress through the house. They entered a dim, narrow room behind the dining hall, a pantry lined with shelves of spices, jars, and preserves. Adelaide motioned to a wooden stool. "Stand there." Celia obeyed. Adelaide walked around her slowly, as if examining a piece of furniture she might return if it disappointed her. The silence dragged until Celia could feel sweat sliding down the small of her back. "You've been in my house for more than a week," Adelaide said, her tone almost conversational. "During that time, I've watched you carefully. You're quiet, obedient, but there is something off about you." She stopped directly in front of Celia and tilted her chin upward with 2 fingers. "Your eyes," she murmured. "They don't look like eyes that know their place." Celia's heart pounded so hard she thought the mistress might hear it. "I've broken women stronger than you," Adelaide whispered. "It never takes long. All it requires is the right pressure." She released Celia's chin abruptly and turned away, picking up a glass jar from a shelf. "Dawson," she called. Heavy footsteps approached. The overseer filled the doorway, blocking out the light. His grin was slow and ugly. "Yes, ma'am." Adelaide handed him the jar. "Take her down to the yard. I want her to learn our rules." Celia tensed. She didn't know exactly what that meant, but she knew enough. Adelaide added, "Let everyone see." Dawson grabbed Celia's arm. His touch was not painful. Not yet, but his grip promised what was coming. Celia's throat tightened. "Wait," Adelaide said, turning back to them. "Bring Pike too. He should set the tone." Dawson nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Celia's pulse turned icy. She felt like she was falling through her own body. Adelaide folded her arms. "Begin before the heat rises too much. We can't have her fainting too early." Celia tried to breathe. Outside, sunlight poured onto the white porch like molten gold. Dawson's grip tightened as they stepped into the yard. Pike was already waiting near the tool shed, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Dawson called out across the quarters. "Bring them out!" Doors creaked open. Men and women slowly emerged from the cabins, summoned by a force they could not resist. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Elders leaned on walking sticks. No one spoke. Whitmore traditions were well known. New slaves were introduced to the plantation with a display meant to crush them quickly and efficiently. Dawson relished the spectacle. Pike enforced it with mechanical detachment. Adelaide oversaw it with a detached cruelty that chilled Celia more than the whip ever could. Dawson dragged her to the center of the yard. Dust rose with each step. "Strip her," Dawson said. Pike didn't move. His jaw tightened for half a second, barely noticeable to anyone but someone watching him closely. Then he said, "No, Mr. Whitmore forbade that for houseworkers." Dawson spat on the ground. "Fine, we'll do it the other way." The other way. Celia felt the world tilt. Dawson shoved her forward onto the ground. Her knees slammed into the dirt, sending a jolt of pain up her legs. Before she could rise, Dawson planted a boot between her shoulders, pinning her down. Dust filled her mouth. Her arms shook. Pike stepped closer. "Enough," he told Dawson quietly. "We're not trying to kill her." "Not yet," Dawson muttered. Ruth stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands trembling as she pressed them together in prayer. Lena buried her face in her palms. A child began to cry but was quickly hushed. Then a shadow fell across the yard. Thomas Whitmore. He strode toward them, boots gleaming, jaw tight. The crowd of slaves bowed instinctively. His presence alone carved a path through the dust. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Mrs. Adelaide wants the new girl taught a lesson," Dawson said eagerly. "Says she needs a reminder of her place." Thomas's gaze slid to Celia, pinned in the dirt. His stare was cold, calculating. He nodded once. "Do it quickly." Dawson grinned. Celia's mind raced. Her muscles tightened. The world blurred at the edges. She could endure the blows. She could endure the humiliation. But what she could not endure was becoming another ghost in this place, another person swallowed quietly without a single trace of resistance. And that realization, though small, sharp, and sudden, was the crack that let everything else break loose. It was the first splinter of defiance. It was the first moment she thought, if I don't fight now, then when? It was the first breath of a rebellion forming in her blood, and it was this moment, this brutal, public breaking, that would lead her, weeks later, to the kitchen floor with a burning iron in her hand and a mistress begging for her life. The pain faded before the memory ever would. For days after Dawson drove her into the dirt, Celia moved like someone trapped between waking and dreaming. Her knees stayed swollen. Her ribs ached when she breathed. The humiliation clung to her skin like the Georgia humidity, impossible to wash off, impossible to forget. But beneath the wounds, something else festered. Something hotter, something alive. It awakened fully on a night thick with the smell of rain. She was scrubbing the kitchen floor long after midnight, after Adelaide had finished snapping orders, after the last lamp had been extinguished upstairs, when a soft knock sounded at the back door. Celia startled, but Ruth quickly moved past her and cracked the door open. An older man stepped inside, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. His hair was silver, his face lined with decades of toil. His name was Samuel. In the quarters, people called him Uncle Sam, not because he was old, but because he remembered a time before Whitmore, a time before chains. Samuel's eyes swept the room until they found Celia. Something shifted in his expression, not pity, not sorrow, but recognition. "You're the new one," he said quietly. Celia lowered her gaze. "Yes." "You stood up," he said. She flinched. "I didn't mean—" "You did," Samuel interrupted, "and you will again." The way he said it, calm, certain, settled into her bones like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. Ruth's eyes widened. "Don't speak like that, Sam. Not in this house." He ignored her. "Girl, listen to me. Whitmore doesn't fear strength. It fears memory. It fears people who refuse to forget who they were before all this." Celia swallowed. She wanted to tell him she didn't feel strong at all. She wanted to tell him she felt small, broken, and afraid. But before she could speak, the back door thumped closed again, this time from someone outside. Footsteps approached. Pike. He stepped into the kitchen, expression unreadable. The lantern light cast harsh shadows across his face. He wasn't carrying a whip or a rope, just exhaustion, the kind that settled deep into the bones of a man who had long ago given pieces of himself away to survive his role. "What are you doing here?" Samuel demanded. Pike ignored him and looked at Celia. "You shouldn't be awake this late." "I'm finishing my work," Celia said cautiously. Pike stared at her long enough that sweat prickled along her spine. Then he said something she never expected to hear. "I tell them not to send me for the young girls," he murmured. "I tell them I want the fields, not the house." His throat bobbed. "But sometimes, what we want doesn't matter here." Celia blinked. She didn't know whether to fear him more or pity him less. Samuel stepped forward, cane thudding against the floor. "Then why are you here now?" Pike's jaw tightened. "Whitmore is changing, getting harsher. Adelaide is pushing him. Dawson is getting bolder." He lowered his voice. "And that girl," he looked at Celia, "has a target on her back." Celia forced herself not to flinch. Pike continued, "If she doesn't stay silent, they'll break her. If she keeps fighting, they'll kill her, Samuel finished. Pike nodded once. I can slow them down, but not for long. Celia wrapped her arms around herself. Why? She whispered. Why warn me? Pike stared at the floor. Because I had a sister once, and I couldn't save her. Silence filled the kitchen, heavy, suffocating, raw. Ruth placed a trembling hand on Celia's shoulder. Child, go sleep. You'll need your strength. But Celia could barely think. Everything she had feared, everything she had tried to swallow, suddenly loomed in front of her, no longer shadow but shape. She wasn't safe. She would never be safe. Unless she changed something. That night, lying on her cot in the dark cabin beside Ruth and Lena, Celia stared at the ceiling as the first raindrops tapped against the roof. Her body ached, but her mind churned. She remembered Adelaide's voice. Teach her the rules. She remembered Dawson's boot pressed between her shoulders. She remembered Samuel's words. Whitmore fears memory. She remembered Pike's warning. You have a target on your back. And she remembered something else. The look on Adelaide's face when Celia had fought back. Shock, fear, the tiniest fracture in the mistress's perfect composure. Celia whispered into the darkness. They want me afraid. No answer came, but the truth settled deep inside her. They can take my body, she said softly. But if I give them my mind, then they win. The rain grew louder. The cabin walls creaked. Ruth shifted in her sleep. Celia closed her eyes. That was when the decision formed. Not yet a plan, not yet a strategy, but a direction. A pull, a promise to herself. She would not break quietly. She would not disappear. She would not spend the rest of her life bowing her head so low she lost sight of who she had been. Someone else might have called it foolishness. Celia called it survival, and survival here was an act of rebellion. For the next week she observed everything with sharpened clarity. She noticed how Adelaide trusted no one but demanded loyalty from everyone. She noticed how Dawson drank too much during the heat of the afternoon. She noticed how Pike watched the overseers more than the slaves. She noticed how Thomas Whitmore's temper flared whenever the crops suffered. She noticed how the other servants flinched at the sound of Adelaide's footsteps, but tensed at the sound of her silence. She filed every detail away, and every night, when she lay on her cot listening to the rhythmic hum of night insects, she whispered the same words repeatedly, as if carving them into the wood of her soul. I will not let them kill who I am. It was not rage she felt. Not yet. It was awareness training its gaze on what she could not yet change. It was the first embers of something waiting to catch fire. And when the moment finally arrived, when Dawson's grip bruised her arm again, when Adelaide's cruelty crossed a line even Pike couldn't stomach, those embers would ignite into a blaze she'd no longer be able to contain. Everything up until now had only been the breaking. What came next would be the rise. The day everything snapped began with a sky the color of bruised steel. Storm clouds gathered over the horizon, thick and heavy, promising rain but delivering only suffocating heat. The air above the fields shimmered. Even the cicadas were quieter than usual, as if anticipating something they could not name. Celia woke before dawn, long before the rooster cried. She had slept little for days. Her dreams were filled with fragments, her mother's voice calling her name, Adelaide's hand gripping her chin, the sound of a whip cracking somewhere in the distance. But she had also begun dreaming of something else, standing tall, unbroken, as the world around her cracked instead. By morning, her decision had solidified. She could not remain silent any longer. She could not wait for fate to decide what happened to her. The knowledge that she had nothing left to lose settled over her like armor. Ruth noticed it first as they prepared breakfast in the kitchen. "You're too calm," the old woman murmured, stirring the pot of grits slowly. Calm like someone who's already made peace with something. Celia didn't look up. "I haven't made peace," she said quietly. I've made a choice. Ruth's spoon stilled. Her eyes glistened with fear. Child, don't. But Celia couldn't turn back, not after what happened the afternoon before. She had been working in the laundry room when Adelaide entered unexpectedly. The mistress's shoulder was wrapped in fresh linen from a small burn she'd gotten leaning too close to the fireplace earlier that morning. The moment Celia saw her, the memory of being pinned in the dirt roared back. The laughter from Dawson, the cold gaze of Thomas Whitmore, the taste of humiliation thick on her tongue. Adelaide approached her slowly, inspecting a clean sheet Celia had just folded. You creased it wrong, she said. It's straight, Celia replied before she could stop herself. Adelaide's head snapped up. What did you say? Celia's breath faltered, but then something inside her steadied. I said, Celia repeated, it's straight. A hush fell over the room. Even the boiling pot seemed to pause its simmer. Adelaide stepped close enough for Celia to smell her perfume, magnolia and starch and something sharper beneath. You think because I didn't let Thomas beat you to death, you can speak to me, she hissed. You think that means you're special? Celia met her gaze, briefly, but enough. I think, she said softly, that your shoulder still hurts. The mistress recoiled as if struck. For the first time, Celia saw it. True fear flickering across Adelaide's features. The memory of the iron, the memory of being helpless, even for a moment. Adelaide fled the room without another word. It was a small victory, but in this world, small victories were sparks, and sparks had a way of becoming flames. Now, as Celia carried a tray of biscuits into the dining room, she felt that spark again, stronger, wilder. Thomas Whitmore was at the head of the table, eating slowly. Pike stood nearby with paperwork. Dawson hovered by the doorway, restless. Thomas looked up. Girl, he said, come here. Celia approached, her pulse quickening. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Adelaide tells me you've been difficult. The word dripped with disdain. I don't tolerate difficult. Celia kept her eyes lowered. Thomas tapped his fingers against the table. You belong to this household. You will do as you are told. And then he added, almost casually, if you cannot behave, I'll have you sent to the breeding sheds on Hartswell Plantation. Do you understand me? A cold shock ran through her. She had heard what happened at Hartswell. The stories were whispered only at night, when the children were asleep. The word breeding carried a horror deeper than any whip. Something broke cleanly inside her. It wasn't rage, it wasn't fear, it was clarity. She set the tray down calmly. Yes, sir, she said. But in her mind, she thought, that will not happen. I will burn this place to the ground first. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of dying embers, Celia gathered the threads she had been collecting for weeks. The kitchen, the pantry, the iron rods, the oil lamps, the barn filled with dry hay, the storm clouds still holding back their rain, and the people who were ready, those who had lost children, lost hope, lost fear. She found Samuel sitting outside his cabin, whittling a piece of wood. It's time, Celia said. He didn't ask what she meant. He simply nodded and stood. You sure? He asked softly. Yes. Ruth approached from the doorway, shaking. Lord, forgive us, she whispered, but maybe it's the only way. Pike appeared from the shadows. Celia nearly stumbled back. You followed me. I've been watching you for days, he said. I knew this moment would come. Will you stop me? Celia asked. Pike exhaled, a long, tired sound. No, he said. I'm done helping them. The final piece fell into place. The plan began in the barn. Samuel quietly poured lamp oil onto the floor, each drop sinking into dry hay. Others, men and women who had been waiting for a moment like this their entire lives, moved silently, passing the oil from hand to hand. Celia lit the match. The barn ignited in a roar of light. Flames raced through the beams, climbing higher, reaching greedily toward the sky. The horses whinnied in terror, but Samuel and the others freed them quickly, slapping their flanks and sending them galloping into the night. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Dawson was the first to notice. He sprinted into the yard, shouting orders. "Water! Buckets! Move!" But the flames were already too high. A second blaze ignited near the tool shed. Someone else had acted on their own. Then a third near the cotton gin. Pike's voice rang out. "Get the children! Get the elders! Head for the river!" Celia raced toward the house. She wasn't finished. Inside, the halls swirled with smoke. Servants grabbed linens, trying to smother flames. Whitmore shouted orders. Adelaide appeared at the top of the stairs, pale and furious. "You!" she screamed as soon as she saw Celia rushing in. "What have you done?" Celia didn't slow. "You think you can burn my home?" Adelaide spat. "You think you can rise above your place?" Celia reached the bottom of the stairs. "My place," she said, "is anywhere you fear." Adelaide's face twisted. Thomas appeared behind her, coughing violently. "Pike!" he bellowed. "Stop them!" But Pike had already thrown his badge of authority into the flames. The fire raced up the curtains. Smoke filled the room. Adelaide shrieked, stumbling backward as cinders rained around her. Thomas grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the side door. But it was too late. The staircase collapsed in a shower of sparks. Celia didn't wait to see what happened next. She turned and ran. Outside, chaos reigned. The enslaved people fled toward the trees in clusters, clutching bundles of food, water, children. Flames lit their path like a torchline, guiding them away from hell. Samuel grabbed Celia's hand. "We go now." She didn't look back. Not when the roof collapsed. Not when Adelaide screamed. Not when Dawson cursed her name. Not when the fire swallowed the White House whole. They ran into the forest, branches slapping at their faces, smoke trailing behind them like a vengeful spirit. The night trembled with the sound of fleeing feet, cracking flames, and the first rumble of long-awaited thunder. For the first time in her life, Celia ran toward something instead of away from it. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing deeply, fiercely, completely. Whitmore Plantation would never own another piece of her. The storm finally broke as Celia and the others plunged deeper into the forest. Rain crashed through the branches, drenching their clothes, cooling the burns on their arms, washing the ash from their hair. Lightning split the sky in jagged white flashes. Thunder rolled overhead like the earth itself was groaning awake. They ran until their legs threatened to give out. They ran until the glow of the burning plantation dimmed behind the trees. They ran until the air no longer tasted like smoke, but like rainwater and pine. Only then did Samuel call them to stop. Dozens of them, men, women, children, elders, collapsed under the dripping canopy of a cluster of tall oaks. The youngest clung to their mothers. Some wept softly. Others stared blankly, unable to process what had just happened. Many had never left Whitmore's land in their entire lives. The forest felt like another country, one with no rules, no overseers, no whip cracking across the air. Celia stood apart for a moment, chest heaving, her hair plastered to her skin. Rainwater slipped down her cheeks, mingling with sweat and soot. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, as though now that the fire was far behind them, her body finally understood what she had done. Samuel stepped beside her, leaning heavily on his cane. "You breathing?" he asked quietly. "Barely," she wanted to say. Instead, she nodded. "You did something tonight no one thought possible," he murmured. "You struck fear into that house, into the people who believed themselves untouchable." Celia spoke softly. "I didn't do it alone." Samuel smiled sadly. None of us ever escape alone, but someone had to start it. Pike approached from the trees, soaked and exhausted. He no longer looked like the overseer who had once patrolled Whitmore's fields. With his shirt torn, mud covering his boots, and eyes hollowed by years of regret, he looked like a man trying, desperately, to walk away from his own past. He stopped in front of Celia. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Pike said, "Whitmore's dead." Celia blinked. "How do you know?" "I stayed behind long enough to see the roof fall." His voice was gravel. "He didn't make it out." Celia felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, no satisfaction. Only a hollow ache for everything the man had taken from this land, and everything he had left behind, ruined. "And Adelaide?" she asked quietly. Pike shook his head. "I don't know. House was too far gone." Celia lowered her gaze. She remembered her mistress's scream, raw, terrified, as the staircase buckled beneath her. She remembered the look of disbelief on Adelaide's face, the realization that all the power she wielded could not save her from the flames she had helped kindle. But death had never been Celia's goal. Freedom had. Ruth approached then, clutching a small bucket she had carried through the storm. Inside were the few bandages and healing herbs she'd smuggled from the kitchen. "Bring me the children first," Ruth said. Her voice shook, but her hands were steady. They spent the next hour treating scrapes, wrapping cuts, washing ash from blistered skin. Celia moved mechanically, helping Samuel steady the elders, holding crying children as the rain tapered off. But just as they finished tending to the injured, Samuel stiffened. Voices, distant but growing louder, and then barking. Celia's blood chilled. Hounds. They found us. Samuel's expression hardened. "We move, now." Pike stepped forward. "I'll hold them off." "No," Celia said sharply. "They'll kill you." He shrugged. "They'll kill all of you if someone doesn't slow them down. I know this forest. I know what Whitmore taught Dawson. I know how they track." Celia felt a sudden, surprising surge of grief. She had feared Pike once, hated him, but the man standing before her was not the overseer she had known. He was simply another soul burdened by what this land had forced him to become. Samuel clasped Pike's shoulder. "Buy us 10 minutes. That's all we need." Pike nodded once, turned, and vanished into the trees. The group fled north, following Samuel's directions through the tangled undergrowth. Branches whipped their faces. Roots caught their feet. The river roared somewhere ahead, its sound growing louder with every breath. Behind them, the hounds howled. Gunshots cracked through the forest. Celia ran harder. Rain-soaked branches slapped her skin. Mud sucked at her shoes. Children clung to her hands. Ruth stumbled, but Celia caught her, dragging her forward. Just when her lungs were about to burst, the woods thinned. And there it was. The river. Dark. Wide. Rapid from the storm. Samuel pointed upstream. "There's a crossing not far." They pushed onward. Minutes felt like hours. Then, a flicker of lantern light appeared ahead. Voices. Not shouting, not hounds, human voices. Calm, low, calling softly. "Over here! Hurry!" 3 men emerged from the shadows. One held a lantern, another carried blankets. The third stood guard with a rifle. Not raised, not aimed, but protective. Celia froze. Samuel didn't. He stepped forward and whispered a single name. "Garrison." The lantern-bearer nodded. "We heard rumors Whitmore had fallen. Didn't expect survivors this fast." He looked at Celia, Ruth, the wounded, the children. "Come. There's a safe house 2 miles north. Then another. After that, freedom if we're lucky." The Underground Railroad. Celia's knees nearly buckled. They crossed the river in silence, ferried by 2 small boats tied with rope to guide them through the current. Celia held Ruth's hand tightly, staring back at the dark trees. She didn't see Pike. She didn't hear the hounds anymore. She didn't know if he had made it. But some part of her hoped, desperately, that he had found his own way out of the fire. The journey north took weeks. They moved at night, sheltered in barns, attics, cellars. Kind strangers fed them bread, water, and quiet hope. Not every helper survived the war to come. Not every traveler made it to freedom. But Celia, Ruth, Samuel, Lena, and nearly everyone who escaped Whitmore endured the long road. And when Celia finally crossed into Ohio, free soil, she stood on a dusty road, staring at a horizon unbroken by cotton fields, and dropped to her knees. Not because she felt weak, but because she felt whole. Ruth hugged her. Samuel bowed his head. Children laughed for the first time since they left Georgia. Celia closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, the wind carried no order, no threat, no voice calling her girl, like she was a thing. It carried only the promise of a life she could shape with her own hands. Years passed. Celia worked in a small laundry in Cleveland. She saved every coin she could. She learned to read better, write better, speak stronger. She helped hide others escaping from the South. She married. She built a home where fear did not live. And yet, every now and then, she would wake in the middle of the night, breath uneven, remembering the feel of a branding iron in her hand. Remembering the moment she realized her life belonged to her. Not to Adelaide, not to Thomas, not to Whitmore, to her. When the Civil War ended and freedom was announced across the South, Celia kept working, helping, teaching, healing. She never returned to Georgia, but her name did. It traveled through whispers, through firesides, through camps, through prayers, through stories told by those who remembered the night Whitmore Plantation burned. She became a symbol not because she wanted to be, but because she had survived, because she had stood, trembling and terrified, and refused to break. And in the years after, when young people asked her how she found the courage, Celia always answered the same way. Courage isn't fire. Courage is the moment you choose not to let your fear speak louder than your life. On the day Celia died at 68, Ruth held her hand. Samuel sat at her bedside. Children she had taught gathered around. Outside the window, the wind rustled the leaves of the Ohio maple trees. Celia looked toward the light falling through the curtain and whispered, "Freedom is never given, it's taken, and once taken, it must be protected." Her funeral drew more people than anyone expected. Neighbors, former slaves, abolitionists, children who knew her only as the woman who always said, "Stand tall even when you tremble." She was buried beneath a tree that bloomed white every spring. Her headstone read, "Celia Thomas. She walked through fire and did not bow." 1843, 1911. And every year, when the blossoms fell like snow, Ruth would touch the stone and whisper, "We remember," because fire may destroy a plantation. But memory destroys a system, and Celia's memory lived on. Where are you listening to this story from?